Do you want to see big numbers? Want to slow the enemy so much they can't attack? Do you want to know who's the dark horse contender for the strongest character of Star Rail's launch? Well, look no further. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Game Club. I'm Graham.
And I'm George, and this is our character guide for the man, the myth, the legend himself, Welt Yang.
Survive or be destroyed. There is no other choice.
We'll kick things off by talking about his kit, and just a quick note, we're going to refer to everything in its maxed out state and at Eidolon level 0. So character level, his skill, ultimate, what have you, it's all fully leveled up unless otherwise specified. We do this because A, you're going to want to level up everything anyways, but B, aside from this brief stint in the beginning of the game, the rest of the entire game he's going to be fully leveled, so it's just much simpler to do it this way. So let's start with his basic attack. It's straightforward and deals imaginary damage to a single enemy. His skill will deal imaginary damage to one enemy and then deals damage 2 extra times to a random enemy. Each time the hit lands, there's a high chance the enemy will be slowed for 2 turns. In instances where there's multiple enemies, this is very useful as you're able to slow down multiple enemies. But in instances where there's only one enemy, say a boss or elite enemy, his skill becomes an imaginary damage bar-breaking machine.
His ultimate is a ridiculously cool AoE attack that hits all enemies on screen. When hitting multiple enemies, not only does it deal relatively high total damage, but there's a 100% base chance all enemies hit by the ult will be imprisoned for 1 turn. As a general note, pay attention to when a skill references effect hit rates, because there's a difference between base chance and fixed chance. Fixed chance is exactly what it says on the tin. 100% is 100%. However, with base chance, you minus out any resistances the enemy might have, and then you have the actual chance. All enemies not weak to an element have an inherent 20% resistance to that element, so Welt's ult will have an 80% chance to apply to someone not weak to imaginary. There are also other enemies with more specific debuff resistances, but we don't want to get lost in the details here. Back to the imprisonment effect of Welt's ult. What that means is that these enemies have their actions delayed specifically by 40% in this case, and then on top of that, their speed is reduced. And if his kit wasn't good enough, in comes his talent, which further increases his damage. Welt deals extra imaginary damage to all slowed enemies, and because his skill slows enemies for 2 turns, it's really easy to have good uptime on it, meaning you'll get a lot of mileage out of his talent. Last but not least, there's his technique. It creates a huge area in which enemies' movement speed is halved, and if you initiate the battle, enemies in the dimension have a chance to be imprisoned for 1 turn. In this case, for this imprisonment, it means that they'll have their actions delayed by 20% along with that additional speed reduction. This imprisonment also affects any chain waves, so if there were other enemies on the overworld that linked with the first enemy, they're all getting imprisoned. And the craziest of all is the imprisonment from the technique and the ultimate. While they don't stack with each other, they do actually stack with the imaginary break, which is the secret sauce that makes Welt so insanely powerful.
Welt may be of the nihility, but from his skills alone, you really start to see he's no mere debuffer. He's got a unique playstyle that also deals a lot of damage. This is further emphasized by looking at his traces. Some of the notable trace upgrades are an increase in the damage enemies take from his ult, along with one that gives energy back when using it, and finally an upgrade that increases the damage he does when an enemy is in a broken state. That last point really reveals one of Welt's most optimal playstyles. He wants to break enemies and then keep them broken for as long as possible to keep cranking out that damage. More on that later, but just remember that he's able to keep enemies broken longer because he slows them down, meaning they won't as easily recover from a break, and when you fully level his traces, that's just more damage on top of an already stacked kit.
So we've hit the highlights of his skills and traces. Now let's look at some of the gear Welt can equip to let him become the powerhouse he truly is. As we've showcased, Welt is fantastic at applying slowness debuff to enemies. So when looking for light cones, you want anything that pairs well with that kind of ability. The best candidates out of light cones we currently have are light cones that deal extra damage to slowed and or debuffed enemies. Additionally, should a light cone, or relic set for that matter, come out that deals extra damage to enemies in a broken state, that could potentially be a good candidate as well, because like we said, he's able to keep enemies from recovering by slowing them down. However, for the light cones we have now, we feel the best 3 options are In the Name of the World, Good Night and Sleep Well, and Loop.
In the Name of the World is Welt's signature 5-star light cone, and unless you're planning on whaling, you'll more than likely only have it at superimposed level 1, maybe 2. With this light cone, you deal more damage to all debuffed enemies, and when using your skill, you double that damage. At superimposed level 1, that's 24% extra damage to debuffed enemies, and then 24% again when using his skill. The light cone also provides an effect hit rate increase of 18%, and while that's still very good, the bigger selling point of the light cone is the damage increase, as Welt's skill already hits multiple times, so you have higher odds to proc its effect. It's a 5-star light cone, so you'll get more stats than a 4-star light cone, meaning it'll scale much better, but again, because it's a 5-star light cone, it'll be much harder to come by.
For a 4-star option, you have Good Night and Sleep Well. At superimposed level 1, it's already pretty decent, as it deals 12% extra damage for every debuff an enemy has, stacking up to 3 times, meaning you could potentially deal 36% extra damage. Not bad. But since it's a 4-star light cone, you can superimpose this one to level 5 much easier. At superimpose 5, it deals 24% per stack, but again, this stacks up to 3 times, which means it's a potential of 72% extra damage. If you have this light cone, it is definitely worth using it with Welt. For a 3-star light cone, Loop is the way to go. It's not as universal as dealing extra damage to debuffed enemies, but it's great for Welt as it deals an extra 48% to slowed enemies at superimpose 5. Obviously, since it's a 3-star, it won't scale as great as the other two from a stat perspective, but you more than likely already have a couple of copies in your inventory, so it's a great option to hold you over until you manage to get your hands on one of the other two.
Albeit not for long, Welt is currently the only character that deals imaginary damage in the game, and to know which relics work best for him, we need to understand the break effect of the imaginary element. To quote the game, once you break an enemy with imaginary damage, the attack will deal imaginary damage and additionally inflicts imprisonment. So upon break, enemies have their actions delayed and receive a speed reduction which, as we've said before, Welt keeps them broken for longer, so we definitely want to capitalize on that. With this in mind, we feel the best in-slot options for relics are 2 pieces from the Thief of Shooting Meteor set and 2 pieces from the Wasteland of Banditry Desert set for your 4 main pieces. And for the planner ornaments, you want the Talia Kingdom of Banditry set. He's got some additional relic options which are still decently good, even if not as optimal, which we'll touch on in a sec.
For the main 4 pieces, it doesn't really matter which ones you put in which place as long as you have 2 of each. The 2 pieces on the Meteor set will give you an increase on the break effect, and the 2 pieces on the Wasteland set will give extra imaginary damage. The substats obviously matter, but honestly, as long as you have a solid main stat, I wouldn't worry too much just yet about getting the perfect substat rolls. We'd argue the main effect of the 2-piece set gets you 90% of the way there. But for the min-max mad lads out there, some good stats to look out for are of course flat and percent attack, break effect, and even effect hit rate. The Talia Planner Ornament set also boosts the break effect. Combined with the Meteor set, this is like having a 4-piece Meteor set on. And if you're able to reach a speed of 145 or higher, the Talia set will increase the break effect by an additional 20%. So you could potentially have an increase of 52% on your break effect. That's a lot of extra slow.
We'll talk about team synergies that help you reach 145 speed so you get the full effect of the Talia set in a moment. But as far as a good stat to look out for in the planner sphere, the best one would be an imaginary damage boost, but attack wouldn't be too bad either. There are some other good relic options that you can mix and match as you see fit to hold you over until you get the relic setup we've just described. Some good options would be a 4-piece set of the Meteor relics for that extra break effect. Having 2 pieces of the Meteor set and then 2 pieces of the Musketeer of the Wild Wheat set wouldn't be bad either, as the 2-piece Musketeer set gives you extra attack, and since it's a very common relic set, you more than likely have some pieces already. A good planner ornament set would be the Space Sealing Station, as that also gives you extra attack. Welt has a native speed of 102, so getting to 120 speed for the additional attack the set gives you is also pretty reasonable depending on the stats of your relics.
In regard to team building and what characters go well with Welt, it's best to keep in mind that he is a skill point heavy character. You get the most amount of overall damage using his skill. The slowness debuff he inflicts does last for 2 turns, so if hard pressed, you could alternate between the skill and the basic attack, but you'd be leaving a lot of potential damage on the table. And when I say damage, I mean damage. Therefore, look for characters that are either skill point neutral or skill point positive. That said, let's start slotting out some team members. Welt is obviously one slot taken on the team. On most content that you don't immediately breeze through, you're going to need some sort of sustain. So we're talking healers or even characters that give shields. That's another slot, which leaves us with 2 more to play around with.
We've mentioned the huge break effect you can get from the relics if Welt's speed is 145 or higher. Well, this is where one of the best characters to pair with Welt comes in, the lead researcher of the Herta space station herself, Asta. We're working hard to get as much content out as we can, and although we won't promise anything, Asta would be a great candidate for a character guide because she's quite good. For now though, we'll focus on how she complements Welt. She'd be a great character for the 3rd slot in the team, as one of her biggest benefits is her ability to increase speed for all characters with her ult for 2 turns. At level 1, her ultimate already increases speed by 36. Taking Welt's native speed into account, this puts you only 7 speed points short of the needed 145 to make full use of the Talia set. More than likely, you'll make up the difference with your relics, and with every level upgrade of Asta's ult, that requirement becomes less and less until it's completely gone at level 6. While you won't have her buff up all the time, just remember, all you need to do is have it lined up with a break. You don't need 100% uptime for it to synergize with the relic set.
And don't forget that increasing speed doesn't just give you the benefit of having the full effects of the Talia set. When joining speed buffs for the team and speed debuffs for the enemies, the relative impact of both of these statuses together is exponentially more impactful than either of them by themselves. The gap for when your characters and the enemies can act become a chasm in which the enemies have to just sit there while you pummel them in the face. Especially since Asta's talent has the ability to increase the attack of the entire team. If there's a best-in-slot team member for Welt, it's probably Asta. If there are instances in which you can't or won't use Asta, another good team member would be Ting Yun. Her skill's always great at increasing the damage Welt can do by increasing his attack, and adding lightning damage to his moves. Just note though that this extra light damage unfortunately doesn't deal any break damage. But as always, more damage is always welcome. Her skill also lasts for 3 turns, making her a great skill point positive character, as she can use her regular attacks when not using her skill. And on top of all of that, her ultimate increases another character's attack and grants them 50 energy points. And you know what that means? Welt can get out his ultimate harder, better, faster, stronger, and imprison more enemies with his already buffed up break effect.
This leaves 1 more slot open in the team, and this last slot is more of a flex spot. Your specific interests, needs, or content you're trying to tackle will determine which character you should use for your last open spot. So it's important to be open-minded and really think about the fights you're going to do and which characters would be best suited for them. Though generally, having an additional DPS character on the team would be a good idea. There's Zila, who's an obvious DPS choice in a lot of teams, and even though she uses a decent amount of skill points, she's so strong that she'd fit right in. Another DPS character who'd feel right at home in a team with Welt is Dan Heng. His ult deals extra damage if a character is slowed, and typically you try and use his skill where he can slow enemies on crit. However, with Welt on the team, you don't need to rely so much on Dan's skill to slow enemies, and you can still enjoy the full damage of his ult. And on teams where there are a lot of enemies, Dan's skill can assist Welt in slowing those enemies that he didn't manage to get.
Also want to give a quick shout out to Qing Chui, not only because she covers Quantum, but because she has a really fun kit, and it synergizes quite well with Welt. And last but not least are the Eidolons. We'll touch on them only briefly, as we're of the opinion that characters are more or less feature complete, so to speak, at Eidolon level 0. With Welt being a 5-star, getting his Eidolons will be a rather difficult task for most of the player base anyways. You can see the effects of his Eidolons on screen, but some of the more noteworthy upgrades we saw were at Eidolon 1, 4, and 6.
And before we go, we wanted to share a tip that should help you with your Welt gameplay. This is not a hard and fast rule, but rather a general guideline, so obviously use your best judgment depending on your specific scenario. But if there are a lot of enemies on screen and more than half of them don't have imaginary weakness, it's better to use your regular attack, or better yet the complementary flex character, to whittle down the number of enemies. Once most of what's left is weak to imaginary, or the enemy, most likely a boss, that you're targeting has been isolated, that's the time to start bringing in his skill.
And that'll do it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. All the support you guys have given us in the last few videos has been amazing. Star Rail has been a blast, and your support enables us to produce more content faster. If you didn't know, we also have a Discord server, and we've got a budding community forming where the ladies and gentlemen of TGC can come together and have in-depth conversations about this game and others.
If you want to see any more character guides or any of the additional content we have cooking up, hit that subscribe button. But with that, we'll see you on the next one.
See ya!